At 2:47 p.m. on October 12, 1943, Staff Sergeant Tommy McKenzie stood in the mess tent at Forward Operating Base Charlie near Bazerte, Tunisia, staring at a Coca-Cola vending machine that had just eaten his last nickel, 24 years old, 8 months in North Africa. 0 functioning vending machines on the entire base. The red and white machine hummed quietly, its compressor working perfectly, its coin mechanism jammed beyond repair. Inside the glass front, 48 ice-cold bottles of Coca-Cola sat tantalizingly out of reach. The base had 847 men who hadn't tasted anything from home in 6 weeks. McKenzie had just discovered the most valuable broken machine in the entire Mediterranean theatre. The 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, had been living on K-rations and warm water for so long that the sight of those perfectly chilled bottles felt like a cruel joke. McKenzie pressed his face against the glass. The bottles were real. The condensation proved the cooling system worked, but the coin slot wouldn't accept money, wouldn't return change, wouldn't dispense anything. Someone had apparently tried to force foreign coins into the mechanism. Italian lire, French francs, German pfennigs, all jammed together in a metallic mess that had seized the entire dispensing system. McKenzie walked away from the machine. But he couldn't stop thinking about those bottles. 48 Coca-Colas in perfect condition, while his entire battalion dreamed about ice-cold drinks from home. The irony was brutal. They were fighting a war thousands of miles from Georgia, where Coca-Cola was invented. And here was a machine full of the stuff, completely inaccessible. That evening, McKenzie mentioned the broken machine to his tent mate, Corporal Eddie Santos from Brooklyn. Santos was the kind of guy who could fix anything mechanical with enough time and the right tools. He'd been a mechanic before the war, worked on everything from subway cars to factory equipment. If anyone could crack open that vending machine, it was Santos. Santos looked at McKenzie like he'd suggested robbing a bank. "You want to break into a Coca-Cola machine? That's destruction of private property, court-martial offence." McKenzie explained that the machine was already broken. They wouldn't be damaging anything. They'd just be accessing products that were going to waste anyway. The bottles would spoil in the heat if nobody could buy them. The next morning, Santos examined the machine during chow time. He traced the electrical connections, studied the coin mechanism, analysed the dispensing system. The cooling unit was a standard commercial refrigeration setup. The coin mechanism was a Watling scale company design, probably from 1940 or 1941. The jam was extensive. Foreign coins had wedged into spaces designed only for American currency. The mechanism would need complete disassembly to clear the blockage. Santos reported his findings to McKenzie after breakfast. The machine could be repaired, but it would take several hours of careful work with proper tools. The coin mechanism would have to be removed entirely, cleaned, and reassembled. Even then, it might not accept foreign currency, which was all most of the troops had. After months in North Africa, McKenzie saw an opportunity. What if they didn't repair the coin mechanism? What if they found another way to distribute those 48 bottles? The machine was essentially a sophisticated refrigerator, full of the most sought-after beverage in the entire theatre of operations. Every soldier in the battalion would pay almost anything for an ice-cold Coca-Cola. That afternoon, McKenzie approached Sergeant First Class Robert Martinez, the battalion's unofficial scrounger. Martinez was a 32-year-old career soldier from Texas who had an uncanny ability to obtain whatever the unit needed through unofficial channels. Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing paper, even fresh fruit occasionally appeared in Martinez's tent through mysterious transactions with local merchants, other military units, and sources he never discussed. Martinez listened to McKenzie's proposal with growing interest. A vending machine full of Coca-Cola that couldn't be purchased through normal means. Bottles that would otherwise go to waste while soldiers desperate for a taste of home had money burning holes in their pockets. The situation practically demanded an entrepreneurial solution. But Martinez understood the risks. Tampering with a vending machine could be considered theft. Selling the contents without authorization might be court-martial material. They'd need to find a way to make the operation appear legitimate, or at least defensible, if questioned by superior officers. The solution came from an unexpected source. Second Lieutenant James Harrison, a 22-year-old platoon leader from Ohio, overheard their conversation during evening chow. Harrison was fresh out of officer candidate school, officially by the book, but privately frustrated by the rigid military bureaucracy that often prevented common-sense solutions to obvious problems. Harrison pointed out a regulation loophole that might cover their situation. Abandoned or inoperative equipment could be requisitioned for unit welfare purposes if proper documentation was filed and no other remedy was available. The vending machine had been broken for over 48 hours. No repair personnel were available. The contents would spoil if left unattended in the desert heat. More importantly, Harrison knew that Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel William Foster was obsessed with unit morale. Foster believed that maintaining connections to home was essential for combat effectiveness. He'd recently approved several unusual requests for recreational activities, including a makeshift baseball diamond and a weekly movie night. Using borrowed projection equipment, Harrison offered to handle the paperwork if McKenzie and Santos could devise a distribution system that served the entire battalion fairly. No black market pricing, no favoritism, no profiteering. Every soldier would have an equal opportunity to purchase a Coca-Cola at a reasonable price. Santos proposed a simple solution. Remove the entire front panel of the machine, exposing the bottle storage area. Set up a supervised distribution point with fixed pricing and quantity limits. 1 bottle per soldier, first come first served, payment in whatever currency they possessed. The operation would be transparent, documented, and designed to maximize unit welfare rather than individual profit. Martinez suggested they establish an exchange rate for foreign currency based on current black market values in Bazerte. Italian lire, French francs, German marks, British pounds, all convertible to an equivalent Coca-Cola price. Soldiers who'd acquired foreign money through various means could finally spend it on something they actually wanted. McKenzie realized they were planning something unprecedented, not exactly legal, not exactly illegal, but definitely outside normal military procedures. They were creating an unofficial economy based on a broken vending machine and the desperate desire of combat soldiers for a taste of home. The risks were significant. If superior officers viewed the operation as profiteering or black market activity, everyone involved could face court-martial, but the potential benefits were enormous. 847 soldiers who hadn't tasted Coca-Cola in months would finally have access to ice-cold bottles of America's most famous beverage. Harrison made the decision that would change everything. He'd file the requisition paperwork that afternoon, listing the vending machine contents as abandoned property suitable for unit welfare distribution. Santos would begin mechanical work on the machine that evening after lights out. Martinez would establish the currency exchange rates and distribution procedures. McKenzie would coordinate the actual sales operation. They had 48 bottles of Coca-Cola and 847 thirsty soldiers. The math was simple and brutal. Less than 6% of the battalion would get a bottle through normal distribution. But McKenzie had a different idea, one that would require expanding their operation far beyond a single broken vending machine. What none of them realized was that their small-scale solution to a broken vending machine was about to become the foundation for the largest unauthorized food distribution network in the North African theatre. By the end of the month, their operation would be feeding not just their own battalion, but units scattered across Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. The broken Coca-Cola machine in the mess tent at Forward Operating Base. Charlie was about to spark a supply chain revolution that would keep thousands of American soldiers fed, supplied, and connected to home through the final months of the North African campaign. But first, they had to figure out how to turn 48 bottles of warm soda into enough resources to feed 847 hungry soldiers. And they had exactly 16 hours before the morning formation, when their commanding officer would discover what they'd done to his vending ending machine. The operation began at 0200 hours on October 13th. Santos worked by flashlight in the mess tent, carefully removing the front panel of the Coca-Cola machine, while McKenzie stood guard. The screws came out easily enough, but the electrical connections were more complicated than expected. The machine's internal wiring had been modified from its original factory configuration, probably to accommodate the 220-volt European electrical system used on the base. Santos traced each wire with methodical precision. Red wire to the compressor motor, black wire to the interior lighting, white wire to the coin mechanism that had caused all the trouble. He disconnected the coin system entirely, leaving the refrigeration unit fully operational. The bottles would stay ice cold, but access would now be completely manual. McKenzie watched Santos work and calculated the economics of their situation. 48 bottles may be worth 5 cents each back in the States. But here in Tunisia, with no other source for hundreds of miles, each bottle was worth whatever a desperate soldier would pay. Some men hadn't tasted Coca-Cola since shipping out from New York 8 months ago. The psychological value far exceeded any reasonable monetary calculation. By 0430, Santos had the machine completely accessible. The bottles sat in neat rows, perfectly chilled, ready for distribution, but removing them revealed a problem nobody had anticipated. The bottles were secured in metal racks designed to release only when proper coins activated the dispensing mechanism. Without the coin system, each bottle had to be manually lifted from its holder, a time-consuming process that would create bottlenecks during distribution. Martinez arrived at 0500 with a canvas bag full of foreign currency samples. He'd spent the night calculating exchange rates based on conversations with local merchants in Bazerte. Italian lire was practically worthless, trading at roughly 400 to 1 against the dollar. French francs were more stable at about 50 to 1. German marks, when available, commanded premium rates because of their silver content. The bigger challenge was determining what price to charge for each Coca-Cola. Too low, and they'd create a feeding frenzy that would empty their inventory in minutes while generating insufficient resources for their larger plans. Too high, and they'd be accused of profiteering from desperate soldiers who earned maybe $50 a month in base pay. Harrison suggested a sliding scale based on available currency. Soldiers with American dollars would pay 25 cents per bottle, 5 times the stateside price, but reasonable given the circumstances. Those with foreign currency would pay equivalent amounts based on Martinez's exchange rates. The premium pricing would limit demand while generating enough revenue to fund their expanded operations. McKenzie proposed quantity limits to ensure fair distribution. 1 bottle per soldier for the first round. If bottles remained after everyone had a chance to purchase, they'd open second-round sales. The system would prevent hoarding while maximising the number of soldiers who could taste home. By 0600, word had spread through the battalion despite their attempts at secrecy. Soldiers appeared at the mess tent asking about rumours of available Coca-Cola. Some offered cigarettes, chocolate bars, or personal items in trade. Others pulled out carefully hoarded foreign coins they'd been saving since landing in North Africa. Private First Class. Danny Morrison from Alabama approached McKenzie with a proposition that would change everything. Morrison worked in the base communications center and had contacts throughout the theater. He'd heard similar stories from other units: broken vending machines, damaged supply shipments, abandoned equipment containing sought-after American products. Morrison explained that the 34th Infantry Division had discovered a truck full of damaged but edible K-rations near Tunis. The 1st Armoured Division had found cases of cigarettes in a bombed warehouse outside Algiers. The 82nd Airborne had located chocolate bars in an abandoned German supply depot. None of these fines were being distributed through official channels because of paperwork complications and bureaucratic delays. McKenzie saw the bigger picture immediately. Their 48 bottles of Coca-Cola weren't just products to be sold. They were capital for a much larger operation, trading commodities between units, leveraging their vending machine success into connections with other scroungers and entrepreneurs throughout North Africa. Martinez confirmed Morrison's information through his network of contacts. Every major base had unofficial supply situations that weren't being addressed through normal military channels. Damaged goods that were technically still edible. Equipment that was functional but not officially approved. Personnel who had access to local resources but no authorization to distribute them. The solution was obvious but risky. Create an inter-unit trading network that could move surplus supplies where they were needed most. Use their Coca-Cola inventory as seed capital to establish relationships with other battalions. Develop a distribution system that could feed soldiers across the entire theatre while staying technically within military regulations. Harrison volunteered to research the legal framework that might cover their expanded operations. Military regulations addressed abandoned property, damaged supplies, and unit welfare activities. Carefully structured, their trading network might qualify as legitimate resource recovery rather than black market profiteering. Santos pointed out the mechanical challenges. Moving supplies between bases required transportation, storage, and inventory management. They'd need vehicles, fuel, and personnel dedicated to logistics operations. The scale of coordination would dwarf their simple vending machine project. By 0700, they had evolved from fixing a broken Coca-Cola machine to planning a supply network that could serve thousands of soldiers across North Africa. The 48 bottles in their makeshift refrigerator were no longer the end goal, but the beginning of something much larger. McKenzie made the decision that would define their operation. They would sell their 48 bottles that morning as planned, but the proceeds would fund reconnaissance missions to other bases. Morrison would use his communications access to identify supply opportunities throughout the theatre. Martinez would establish contact with potential trading partners. Santos would work on transportation and storage solutions. The first customer arrived at 7:30. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez from the motor pool, clutching a handful of Italian lyre and asking if the rumours were true. Could he really buy an ice-cold Coca-Cola for the first time since leaving the States? McKenzie handed Rodriguez bottle number 1, accepted 10,000 lyre as payment, and watched a tough combat veteran's face light up like Christmas morning. Rodriguez held the bottle like it was made of gold, savoured the first sip, and closed his eyes in pure satisfaction. Within minutes, a line formed outside the mess tent, soldiers with foreign coins, American dollars, and various trade goods. Each purchase was carefully documented in Harrison's ledger. Each bottle was distributed with ceremony, befitting its rarity and value. By 9 a.m., they had sold 35 bottles and accumulated enough foreign currency to fund their first trading expedition. Morrison had identified 3 potential supply opportunities. Within 50 miles, Martinez had established radio contact with scroungers at 2 other bases. McKenzie realized they weren't just selling Coca-Cola anymore. They were selling hope, connection to home, and proof that American ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. The broken vending machine had become the foundation for an operation that would ultimately feed thousands of soldiers and demonstrate that sometimes the best solutions come from the bottom up. The remaining 13 bottles would launch the next phase of their plan. And Lieutenant Colonel Foster was about to discover that his men had found a way to turn military bureaucracy into the most effective supply network in the North African theatre, African theatre. Lieutenant Colonel William Foster discovered the modified vending machine at 09:15 hours during his routine morning inspection of base facilities. He stood in the mess tent doorway, watching Staff Sergeant McKenzie hand a bottle of Coca-Cola to Private Williams, while Corporal Santos documented the transaction in a handwritten ledger. The machine's front panel leaned against the tent wall. Electrical wires dangled from the exposed interior. 13 bottles remained in the refrigerated compartment. Foster was 38 years old, a career infantry officer who had commanded the 2nd Battalion through 8 months of North African combat. He understood his men better than most commanders understood theirs. He knew they were hungry, homesick, and desperate for any connection to the life they'd left behind. He also knew that unauthorized modification of military equipment could result in court-martial proceedings for everyone involved. McKenzie saw the colonel approaching and made a split-second decision that would determine whether their operation continued or ended in military prison. He walked directly toward Foster, carrying the ledger and the canvas bag of foreign currency. No hiding, no excuses, complete transparency about what they'd accomplished. "Sir," Staff Sergeant McKenzie reporting an equipment malfunction and subsequent resource recovery operation. The vending machine suffered mechanical failure 48 hours ago. No repair personnel available. Contents at risk of spoilage due to desert heat exposure. 2nd Lieutenant Harrison filed requisition paperwork under Regulation 735-5, covering abandoned property suitable for unit welfare purposes. Foster examined the ledger while McKenzie explained their pricing structure, distribution limits, and documentation procedures. 35 bottles sold at fair market value based on local currency exchange rates. Proceeds designated for unit welfare activities pending command approval. No profiteering, no favoritism, complete transparency in all transactions. The colonel walked to the disabled machine and studied Santos's work. The electrical modifications were professional quality. The refrigeration system operated perfectly. The bottle storage remained organized and sanitary. Whatever else this operation represented, it demonstrated technical competence and attention to detail. Foster asked the question McKenzie had been dreading. "What exactly constitutes unit welfare activities, Sergeant?" McKenzie explained their reconnaissance findings. Surplus supplies scattered across multiple bases with no official distribution mechanism. Damaged but edible foodstuffs abandoned due to bureaucratic complications. American products available through unofficial channels but not reaching soldiers who needed them. Most Morrison stepped forward and described his communications intelligence. The 1st Armoured Division had located 200 cases of cigarettes in a bombed warehouse near Algiers, officially condemned due to water damage, actually perfectly smokable. The 34th Infantry Division had discovered a truck full of K-rations with damaged packaging but intact contents. Military regulations prevented distribution through normal supply chains. Martinez presented his currency analysis and trading proposals. Foreign money, accumulated by soldiers, had no practical value within the military system. Local merchants accepted lire and francs for small purchases, but soldiers wanted American products, not Tunisian handicrafts. Their operation could convert worthless foreign currency into resources that actually improved unit morale and combat effectiveness. Harrison produced his legal research. Military regulations addressed resource recovery, inter-unit cooperation, and morale enhancement activities. Properly structured and documented, their trading network could operate within existing guidelines while serving legitimate military purposes. The key was maintaining official oversight and transparent accounting procedures. Foster listened without interrupting. He understood the implications immediately. His sergeants had identified a systemic failure in military supply procedures and developed an unauthorized but potentially effective solution. They were proposing to circumvent official channels while staying technically within regulatory boundaries. The colonel faced a command decision that would affect not just his own battalion, but potentially the entire North African theatre. Approve their operation and risk career-ending charges if higher command disapproved. Shut down their activities and accept that his men would continue suffering from inadequate supply while resources went to waste throughout the region. Foster made his choice based on 16 years of military experience and 8 months of watching good soldiers make do with insufficient resources. He would authorize their operation under 3 conditions. First, all activities would be conducted with complete transparency and documentation. Second, any profits beyond direct expenses would be contributed to unit welfare funds. Third, he would maintain plausible deniability by designating their network as an official resource recovery program. McKenzie felt something shift in that moment. They weren't running an unauthorized black market anymore. They were operating an official military program with command approval and regulatory protection. The broken vending machine had evolved into legitimate military logistics. Foster assigned additional personnel to support their expanded operations. Sergeant Davis from the motor pool would provide transportation assets. Corporal Thompson from supply would handle inventory management and accounting. Private Jackson from communications would coordinate with other units and maintain operational security. By 1000 hours, their resource recovery program had official designation as Task Force Provisions. Morrison began reaching out to contacts throughout the theatre, identifying supply opportunities and potential trading partners. Martinez started planning their first inter-unit expedition to collect the cigarettes near Algiers. Santos designed mobile refrigeration units that could transport perishable goods between bases. The remaining 13 bottles of Coca-Cola were distributed that afternoon to soldiers who had missed the morning sales. Each transaction was recorded in official ledgers. Each bottle represented proof that American military ingenuity could overcome any logistical challenge when properly motivated. McKenzie stood in the mess tent that evening, looking at the empty vending machine that had started everything. In less than 24 hours, they had transformed a mechanical failure into an official military program with the potential to feed thousands of soldiers across North Africa. But the real test would come tomorrow, when Morrison's first trading expedition departed for Algiers. They would be carrying foreign currency, official requisition papers, and the hopes of 847 soldiers who wanted to believe their military could adapt and overcome any obstacle. The broken Coca-Cola machine had taught them something crucial about military logistics. Official supply chains were designed for predictable situations with adequate resources. Combat operations created unpredictable situations with inadequate resources. Success required flexibility, creativity, and willingness to find solutions that hadn't been written into any manual task force provisions, would either prove that bottom-up innovation could supplement top-down planning, or it would demonstrate why military regulations existed to prevent unauthorized activities regardless of good intentions. Morrison's convoy would leave at 0600 hours, with 3 trucks, 12 personnel, and enough foreign currency to purchase every cigarette in that Algiers warehouse. Their success or failure would determine whether the broken vending machine had sparked a revolution in military supply operations, or simply delayed the inevitable court-martial of 5 soldiers who had tried to solve problems beyond their authority. Foster watched from his command tent as McKenzie briefed the convoy leaders on their mission parameters. The colonel had authorized an operation that existed in the grey area between official military policy and unauthorized entrepreneurship. Tomorrow would reveal whether his faith in his soldiers' judgment had been warranted or catastrophically misplaced. The vending machine sat empty now, its electrical system restored, its coin mechanism still jammed beyond repair. But it had already served its most important function. It had demonstrated that broken systems could be fixed by people willing to think beyond conventional solutions and take responsibility for results rather than hiding behind regulations. McKenzie closed his ledger and prepared for tomorrow's challenges. They had turned 48 bottles of Coca-Cola into an official military program with the potential to transform how the Army handled supply logistics in combat zones. The real question was whether Task Force Provisions could deliver on its promises without triggering the bureaucratic backlash that destroyed most unauthorized innovations in military organizations. They were about to find out if American soldiers could really adapt and overcome any obstacle, or if military regulations would ultimately prevent the very flexibility that combat operations demanded. Morrison's convoy departed Forward Operating Base, Charlie, at 05:47 hours on October 14th, with 3 deuce-and-a-half trucks, 12 hand-picked soldiers, and 847,000 Italian lire stuffed into canvas money bags. The lead truck carried Morrison and Sergeant Davis from the motor pool. The second hauled Santos with his improvised refrigeration equipment. The third transported Corporal Thompson with ledgers, scales, and documentation materials that would make their operation appear legitimate to any military police who stopped them. The drive to Algiers took 4 hours through terrain that shifted from desert scrub to coastal hills. Morrison used the time to brief his team on what they might encounter at the bombed warehouse. Intelligence suggested the cigarettes belonged to a German supply convoy that had been destroyed by Allied air attack 3 weeks earlier. The contents were technically enemy materiel, which simplified the legal complications of acquisition, but intelligence was often wrong. The warehouse might be empty. The cigarettes might be destroyed beyond use. German forces might have established observation posts to monitor salvage activities. Morrison's convoy could arrive to find nothing but rubble and wasted fuel, or they could drive into an ambush that would end Task Force Provisions before it really began. Davis navigated using maps that predated the war by 15 years. Road conditions had deteriorated under military traffic and combat damage. Bridges were destroyed or weakened. Detours added miles to every journey. What should have been a simple supply run became an expedition into uncertain territory with questionable objectives. The warehouse appeared through morning haze at 09:51 hours, exactly where intelligence had indicated. A concrete structure, with its roof partially collapsed, walls blackened by fire, surrounded by the scattered debris of destroyed vehicles. Morrison's convoy approached cautiously, weapons ready, expecting to find evidence of recent German activity. Instead, they found evidence of American activity, boot prints in the sand around the building, tire tracks from military vehicles, empty C-ration cans and cigarette butts indicating recent occupation. Someone else had discovered the warehouse and was using it for purposes unknown. Morrison made a tactical decision that would define the next phase of their operation. Instead of retreating or reporting the situation to higher command, he ordered his convoy to establish defensive positions and investigate. If Americans were already working the site, Task Force Provisions needed to understand the competition and possibly negotiate cooperation. The investigation revealed something unexpected. The warehouse contained not just cigarettes, but a sophisticated supply depot operated by personnel from multiple units. The 1st Armoured Division had contributed transportation assets. The 34th Infantry Division provided security personnel. The 82nd Airborne supplied communications equipment and coordination. Staff Sergeant Miguel Vasquez from the 1st Armoured approached Morrison's convoy with professional caution. Vasquez commanded what he called the Mediterranean Supply Cooperative, an inter-unit organization that had been operating for 6 weeks without official authorization. They had discovered the same systematic failures in military logistics that Task Force Provisions was attempting to address. Vasquez explained their operation, while Morrison listened with growing amazement. The Mediterranean Supply Cooperative had identified 17 locations containing abandoned or damaged American supplies. They had established trading relationships with local merchants, other Allied units, and even some Italian civilians who had access to resources the military needed. Their inventory included 40,000 cigarettes from the bombed warehouse, 800 cases of K-rations from various damaged shipments, 200 bottles of medical alcohol from a destroyed aid station, and 150 woolen blankets salvaged from a sunken transport ship. They had vehicles, personnel, and distribution networks that spanned from Morocco to Italy. Morrison realized he was looking at exactly what Task Force Provisions aspired to become: a successful, functioning supply network that existed outside official channels while serving legitimate military needs. The question was whether competition or cooperation would better serve both organizations. Vasquez proposed a partnership that would combine their resources and eliminate duplication of efforts. Task Force Provisions would contribute their North African contacts and foreign currency reserves. The Mediterranean Supply Cooperative would provide transportation assets and establish distribution channels. Together, they could serve thousands of soldiers instead of hundreds. Morrison accepted the partnership proposal immediately. Radio contact with McKenzie confirmed authorization to negotiate cooperative agreements with other unofficial supply organizations. Foster had anticipated this possibility and granted Morrison discretionary authority to represent Task Force Provisions in inter-unit discussions. By 1200 hours, Morrison had negotiated the merger of Task Force Provisions with the Mediterranean Supply Cooperative under the joint designation of Allied Resource Recovery Network. The combined organization would serve 12 battalions across North Africa, with inventory valued at over $50,000 and transportation capabilities that rivaled official supply chains. Santos examined the warehouse refrigeration equipment and declared it salvageable with minor repairs. The building's concrete construction provided excellent insulation. The electrical system could be restored using generators from destroyed vehicles. Within 48 hours, they could establish a regional distribution center capable of storing perishable goods for extended periods. Thompson reviewed the Mediterranean Supply Cooperative's accounting procedures and found them superior to his own hastily created systems. Vasquez's organization had developed sophisticated inventory tracking, quality control standards, and financial management protocols that would satisfy any military audit. Their documentation was better than most official supply operations. The merger revealed the true scope of unofficial supply activities throughout the North African theatre. Almost every major unit had personnel engaged in resource recovery, inter-unit trading, or local procurement activities. The military's official supply system was being supplemented by dozens of unauthorized networks that had emerged organically to address systemic failures. Morrison reported his findings to McKenzie via radio at 1400 hours. Task Force Provisions was no longer a battalion-level operation, but part of a theatre-wide network that included personnel from the division-level units and specialized support organizations. Their broken vending machine had connected them to the largest unauthorized supply operation in military history. McKenzie understood the implications immediately. Success would demonstrate that decentralized resource management could supplement centralized supply chains during combat operations, but discovery by higher command could result in court-martial proceedings for hundreds of soldiers across multiple divisions. Foster received Morrison's report with mixed emotions. His authorization of Task Force Provisions had inadvertently connected his battalion to activities that extended far beyond his command authority. The operation was either brilliant innovation or massive insubordination, depending on perspective and outcomes. The warehouse inventory required immediate decisions about distribution priorities and transportation logistics. 40,000 cigarettes could serve every soldier in the Allied Resource Recovery Network for approximately 2 weeks. The K-rations could supplement official food supplies for 3 major units. The medical alcohol had obvious applications for both medical and morale purposes. Vasquez proposed establishing regional distribution centers at 6 locations across North Africa. Each center would serve specific geographic areas while maintaining communication and coordination with the others. The network would operate like a civilian supply chain adapted for military requirements and combat conditions. Morrison volunteered to command the Tunisian distribution centre at the Algiers warehouse. Santos would design and install refrigeration systems at all 6 locations. Thompson would establish accounting procedures that could withstand official scrutiny. Davis would coordinate transportation between centres and customer units. By 1600 hours, the Allied Resource Recovery Network had evolved from Morrison's original trading expedition into a comprehensive supply organisation with the potential to revolutionise military logistics. The broken vending machine at Forward Operating Base Charlie had become the catalyst for the largest unofficial military operation since the American Revolution. But the network's success depended on maintaining operational security while serving thousands of soldiers across multiple theatres. Every transaction increased their visibility. Every satisfied customer created another witness to their activities. Eventually, someone would report to their operations to higher command, and the entire network would face official scrutiny. Morrison loaded his trucks with cigarettes, K-rations, and documentation materials for the return journey to Forward Operating Base. Charlie, his convoy, now carried enough supplies to serve his battalion for a month, plus inventory for distribution to other units throughout Tunisia. The return journey would take 6 hours through territory that might contain German patrols, Allied military police, or officials from higher command who would ask uncomfortable questions about unauthorized supply activities. Morrison's convoy carried evidence of the most successful, unofficial military operation in modern history, or the most extensive violation of military regulations ever documented. McKenzie waited at Forward Operating Base Charlie with 847 soldiers who expected their resource recovery program to deliver on its promises. Foster monitored radio communications for any indication that Morrison's expedition had been discovered or intercepted. The entire battalion held its collective breath while waiting for news that would determine their future. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had grown beyond anyone's expectations or control. What started as a solution to a broken vending machine had become a military organisation that operated parallel to official command structures, while serving the same soldiers and the same objectives. Success would prove that American military personnel could adapt and overcome any logistical challenge when given appropriate freedom and support. Failure would demonstrate why military regulations existed to prevent unauthorized activities, regardless of their apparent benefits. Morrison's convoy approached the base perimeter at 21:47 hours, with headlights dimmed and radios silent. They carried enough supplies to transform how the 2nd Battalion lived and fought, plus proof that military innovation could emerge from the bottom up when soldiers were allowed to solve problems instead of simply enduring them. The convoy's arrival at Forward Operating Base. Charlie created controlled chaos in the best possible way. Morrison's trucks rolled through the perimeter gates, loaded with more American products than the battalion had seen since departing New York 9 months earlier. Word spread through the camp faster than radio communications. Soldiers emerged from tents, maintenance areas, and guard positions to witness the impossible sight of military trucks overflowing with cigarettes, food, and supplies that hadn't been available through official channels. McKenzie met Morrison at the motor pool with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The expedition had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections, but success brought complications that failure would have avoided. 40,000 cigarettes represented enough smoking material to supply their battalion for 6 weeks. 800 cases of K-rations could supplement their food supplies indefinitely. The medical alcohol would solve sanitation problems that had plagued the unit since arriving in North Africa, but the scale of their success made concealment impossible. Every soldier who received cigarettes would know they hadn't come through normal supply channels. Every man who ate supplemental K-rations would understand that unofficial sources were feeding him. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had grown too large to operate in secrecy, which meant they needed legitimacy or they needed to shut down immediately. Foster appeared at the motor pool as Morrison's teams began unloading supplies. The colonel examined cigarette cartons, K-ration cases, and inventory documentation with the methodical attention of an officer who understood that his career depended on making the right decision about activities that existed in the grey area between innovation and insubordination. The cigarettes were genuine American products, manufactured by companies in Virginia and North Carolina. The K-rations bore official military inspection stamps and expiration dates that indicated they remained fully edible. The medical alcohol met military specifications for both medicinal and sanitation purposes. Everything Morrison had acquired was legitimate American military supplies that had been abandoned or damaged through combat operations. Foster made the command decision that would determine whether the Allied Resource Recovery Network survived or died. He designated all recovered supplies as official battalion inventory acquired through authorized resource recovery operations. Morrison's expedition became an official military mission retroactively. The Mediterranean Supply Cooperative became an official inter-unit cooperation agreement approved at battalion level. The colonel understood the risks he was accepting. Higher command might disapprove of his unauthorized cooperation with other units. Military regulations might not support his interpretation of resource recovery authorities. His superiors might view the entire operation as elaborate black market profiteering disguised as legitimate military activity. But Foster also understood the benefits his decision would provide. His battalion would be better fed, better supplied, and better connected to other units throughout the theatre. His soldiers would have access to American products that reminded them what they were fighting to preserve. His unit's combat effectiveness would improve through enhanced morale and improved logistics. Santos began distributing cigarettes that evening, using procedures refined through their Coca-Cola sales experience. 1 pack per soldier initially, with additional packs available after everyone had received their allocation. Pricing remained consistent with their established foreign currency exchange rates. Documentation recorded every transaction for potential military audit. The cigarette distribution revealed the true demand for American products among combat soldiers. Men who claimed they didn't smoke accepted cigarettes for trading purposes. Soldiers who had quit smoking months earlier resumed the habit immediately. Personnel who had never used tobacco began learning from experienced smokers who treated each cigarette like precious currency. Private Morrison from Alabama approached Santos with a proposal that demonstrated how quickly their network was expanding beyond their original parameters. Morrison had established contact with French resistance personnel who had access to German supply caches throughout Tunisia. The resistance fighters wanted American cigarettes and K-rations in exchange for information about German troop movements and supply routes. Santos recognized the intelligence implications immediately. Their resource recovery network could provide American military units with tactical intelligence that wasn't available through official channels. French resistance fighters knew local conditions, German activities, and supply opportunities that military intelligence had never identified. But intelligence cooperation with foreign nationals required authorization levels far beyond battalion command. Foster couldn't approve intelligence sharing agreements with civilian resistance organizations. Such activities required approval from theater command or higher, which would expose their entire operation to official scrutiny. Morrison's proposal created a dilemma that illustrated how success could generate problems that failure would have avoided. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had demonstrated its ability to acquire and distribute supplies effectively. Now they were being offered opportunities that exceeded their authority while serving legitimate military objectives. McKenzie discussed the intelligence opportunity with Martinez, who had maintained contacts throughout the theatre. Since their operation began, Martinez reported that similar proposals were reaching other components of their network. Italian partisans wanted American supplies in exchange for German equipment locations. British Special Operations personnel offered German intelligence documents for American cigarettes and chocolate. The network was evolving from supply recovery into intelligence trading, which represented either expanded military capability or unauthorized espionage activities, depending on interpretation and authorization levels. Every opportunity increased their effectiveness while increasing their vulnerability to charges of exceeding military authority. Thompson documented the intelligence offers in his accounting ledgers, alongside supply transactions and distribution records. His documentation system was designed to demonstrate transparency and legitimacy, but intelligence activities required security classifications and compartmentalization that exceeded his administrative capabilities. Foster faced another command decision about activities that his soldiers had initiated without authorization, but that served legitimate military purposes: approve intelligence cooperation and risk charges of unauthorized espionage, disapprove such activities and forfeit intelligence opportunities that could save American lives. The colonel chose a middle path that satisfied neither complete authorization nor complete prohibition. He would allow his personnel to accept intelligence information voluntarily provided by foreign contacts, but they couldn't actively solicit such information or provide American supplies specifically in exchange for intelligence. The compromise satisfied military regulations while allowing practical cooperation with resistance organizations that wanted to share information. It provided Foster with plausible deniability while giving his soldiers flexibility to accept intelligence that could enhance their combat effectiveness. Davis reported transportation requirements for expanding their distribution network to serve the 6 regional centers that Vasquez had proposed. The operation would require dedicated vehicles, fuel allocations, and personnel assignments that exceeded normal battalion resources. They needed official support, or they needed to scale back their activities significantly. Foster authorized the transportation requirements by designating them as inter-unit cooperation activities authorized under existing military regulations. Davis would command a provisional transportation section dedicated to resource recovery operations. His vehicles would operate under official military orders while serving the Allied Resource Recovery Network. By November 1st, the network had expanded to serve 47 battalions across North Africa, with inventory valued at over $200,000. Their operations included 6 regional distribution centers, 12 transportation routes, and coordination with resistance organizations in 3 countries. McKenzie stood in the mess tent where everything had started, looking at the repaired Coca-Cola vending machine that now dispensed cold drinks purchased through normal military channels. The machine worked perfectly, accepting American coins and providing cold beverages to soldiers who could afford the official price. But the machine's repair had come too late to matter. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had grown beyond dependence on any single source or distribution method. They'd created a supply system that could adapt to changing conditions, exploit unexpected opportunities, and serve military personnel regardless of official supply chain failures. The broken vending machine had taught them that military logistics required flexibility, creativity, and willingness to find solutions outside established procedures. Their success had demonstrated that bottom-up innovation could supplement top-down planning when soldiers were authorized to solve problems instead of simply enduring them. Morrison returned from his 3rd supply expedition with reports of German supply caches, Italian partisan activities, and French resistance operations that were providing American forces with tactical advantages throughout the Mediterranean theater. The network had evolved from supply recovery into comprehensive military support that included logistics, intelligence, and inter-allied cooperation. Foster prepared his monthly report to regimental command with careful attention to language that would describe their activities as authorized military operations rather than unauthorized entrepreneurship. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had become too successful to abandon and too visible to conceal. The report would either establish precedent for decentralized resource management in combat operations or trigger investigations that would end the careers of everyone involved. Foster had committed his reputation and his future to the belief that military innovation should be rewarded rather than punished when it served legitimate objectives. The broken Coca-Cola vending machine in the mess tent at Forward Operating Base. Charlie had sparked the creation of the most successful unofficial military organization in modern history. Whether that organization would be recognized as legitimate innovation or condemned as massive insubordination would be determined by officers who had never faced the supply challenges that had made such innovation necessary. McKenzie closed his ledger and prepared for whatever official response their success would generate. They had proven that American soldiers could adapt and overcome any logistical obstacle when given appropriate freedom and support. The question was whether the military establishment would embrace that innovation or suppress it to maintain traditional command and control procedures. The official response arrived at Forward Operating Base Charlie on November 15th in the form of Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson from Theatre Supply Command, accompanied by 2 military police officers and a stenographer. Patterson was 44 years old, a West Point graduate with 16 years of peacetime logistics experience and zero tolerance for unauthorized military activities. He had been dispatched from Algiers with explicit orders to investigate reports of irregular supply operations throughout the North African theatre. Patterson's investigation began with a formal interview of Foster in the battalion command tent. The colonel from Theatre Supply Command had reviewed preliminary reports that described activities ranging from unauthorized inter-unit cooperation to possible black market profiteering involving American military personnel across multiple divisions. His mission was to determine whether these activities represented innovative resource management or systematic violations of military regulations. Foster presented his documentation with the confidence of an officer who had carefully maintained official authorization for every aspect of their operations, the requisition papers for the original vending machine contents, the inter-unit cooperation agreements with other battalions, the resource recovery authorizations that covered their supply expeditions, every transaction recorded, every distribution documented, every procedure designed to demonstrate compliance with existing military regulations. Patterson examined Foster's paperwork with the methodical attention of a career logistics officer who understood that successful, unauthorized activities were often more dangerous than unsuccessful ones. The documentation was comprehensive, professionally prepared, and technically compliant with military regulations. But the scale of operations described in Foster's reports exceeded anything Patterson had encountered in 16 years of military service. The investigation expanded to include interviews with McKenzie, Morrison, Santos, Martinez, Thompson, and Davis. Each soldier provided consistent testimony about their activities while demonstrating detailed knowledge of military regulations governing resource recovery, inter-unit cooperation, and unit welfare activities. Their responses indicated either extensive legal research or careful coaching by someone who understood military law. Patterson's stenographer recorded testimony that described the most sophisticated, unofficial supply operation in military history. 47 battalions served across 6 countries, inventory valued at over $200,000, transportation networks that rivaled official supply chains, intelligence cooperation with resistance organizations in 3 nations, all conducted by enlisted personnel operating under battalion-level authorization. The military police officers investigated the physical evidence of their operations, the repaired vending machine in the mess tent, the regional distribution centres throughout North Africa, the transportation assets dedicated to resource recovery missions, the inventory records that documented thousands of transactions involving American military supplies. Everything Patterson discovered confirmed that the Allied Resource Recovery Network had achieved remarkable success while maintaining technical compliance with military regulations. But success on this scale required either exceptional competence or exceptional luck, and Patterson's experience suggested that luck rarely sustained operations of such complexity and duration. Santos demonstrated the refrigeration equipment he had designed for mobile supply operations. His modifications to standard military generators had created cooling systems that could preserve perishable goods during extended transportation through desert conditions. The engineering was sophisticated, practical, and entirely unauthorized by any official technical manual. Martinez explained his currency exchange procedures and trading relationships with local merchants throughout Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. His network included Italian civilians, French resistance fighters, British special operations personnel, and German prisoners who had access to resources unavailable through official channels. The relationships were productive, professionally managed, and completely outside normal military protocols. Thompson presented accounting records that documented every transaction conducted by the network since its inception 6 weeks earlier. His ledgers included foreign currency exchanges, inventory transfers, distribution records, and financial statements that would satisfy any official audit. The accounting was accurate, comprehensive, and maintained by a corporal with no formal training in military financial procedures. Patterson realized he was investigating an organization that had solved supply problems throughout the North African theater while maintaining better documentation than most official military operations. The soldiers he interviewed demonstrated competence levels that exceeded many officers he had known. Their success challenged fundamental assumptions about military logistics and command authority. But Patterson also understood that unauthorized success could be more dangerous than authorized failure. If enlisted personnel could operate supply networks that rivaled official systems, what did that say about the necessity of existing command structures? If battalion commanders could authorize activities that served theatre-wide objectives, what was the purpose of higher command authority? The investigation created a dilemma for Theatre Supply Command that went beyond simple regulatory compliance. Shutting down the Allied Resource Recovery Network would eliminate the most effective supply operation in the Mediterranean theatre. Officially approving their activities would establish precedents that could undermine military command authority throughout the army. Patterson's preliminary report to his superiors described activities that were technically compliant with regulations but practically revolutionary in their implications. The network had demonstrated that decentralized resource management could supplement centralized supply chains when appropriate authority and documentation were maintained. But the report also noted that such operations required exceptional personnel with skills that exceeded normal military training requirements. McKenzie, Morrison, Santos, Martinez, Thompson, and Davis represented a combination of technical competence, entrepreneurial initiative, and regulatory knowledge that couldn't be replicated in most military units. Foster received informal notification that his activities were under review by officers whose authority exceeded theatre command. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had attracted attention from personnel in Washington who were interested in either adopting their methods or preventing their replication depending on political and military considerations. The network's operations continued during the investigation because shutting down activities that served 47 battalions would create supply shortages that could affect combat readiness throughout the theatre. Patterson's superiors understood that success created obligations that failure would have avoided. McKenzie maintained daily operations while preparing for potential court-martial proceedings that could end his military career and result in federal prison sentences. The network had grown beyond his ability to control or conceal, but it continued to serve thousands of soldiers who depended on supplies that weren't available. Through official channels, Morrison reported increasing demand for network services from units throughout the Mediterranean theatre. Word of their success had spread to Italy, Sicily, and even some Pacific theatre operations, where similar supply challenges existed. The network was receiving requests for expansion into geographic areas that exceeded their transportation and personnel capabilities. Santos designed portable bottling equipment that could produce carbonated beverages using local water sources and concentrated syrups. His engineering innovations could provide American soldiers with familiar drinks regardless of location or official supply availability. The equipment was practical, effective, and completely unauthorized by any military technical manual. Davis coordinated transportation operations that moved supplies between North Africa, Italy, and Sicily, using a combination of military vehicles, civilian contractors, and Allied naval assets. His logistics network operated parallel to official supply chains, while serving the same military objectives with greater flexibility and responsiveness. The investigation revealed that similar unauthorized supply operations existed throughout the European and Pacific theatres. Military personnel at every level had developed informal solutions to supply problems that official systems couldn't address. The Allied Resource Recovery Network wasn't unique, but rather representative of systematic adaptation to wartime logistics challenges. Patterson's final report recommended official recognition of resource recovery operations as legitimate military activities when properly authorized and documented. His investigation had confirmed that decentralized supply management could enhance rather than replace centralized logistics systems when appropriate oversight and accountability measures were maintained. But the report also recommended that future operations receive prior authorization from appropriate command levels rather than retroactive approval from local commanders. The success of Foster's network had demonstrated both the potential benefits and the inherent risks of unauthorized military innovation. Foster received official notification on December 1st that the Allied Resource Recovery Network would be incorporated into official military supply operations as a pilot program for decentralized resource management. McKenzie would be promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to Theatre Supply Command as a specialist in unconventional logistics operations. Morrison, Santos, Martinez, Thompson, and Davis would receive commendations for innovative military service and assignment to positions that would allow them to develop similar programs in other theatres. Their success had transformed potential court-martial charges into career advancement opportunities. The broken Coca-Cola vending machine in the mess tent at Forward Operating Base. Charlie had sparked the creation of military logistics innovations that would influence supply operations for decades after the war ended. The network had proven that American soldiers could adapt and overcome any obstacle when given appropriate authority and support. But the machine itself remained in the mess tent, dispensing cold beverages to soldiers who could afford the official price. It worked perfectly now, accepting American coins and providing familiar products to personnel who understood that sometimes the most important innovations come from the simplest problems. McKenzie stood beside the machine, one final time before departing for his new assignment with Theatre Supply Command. The vending machine had taught him that military logistics required flexibility, creativity, and willingness to find solutions outside established procedures. Those lessons would guide his work in developing official programs that incorporated the innovations their unauthorized network had pioneered. The Allied Resource Recovery Network had demonstrated that bottom-up innovation could supplement top-down planning when soldiers were authorized to solve problems instead of simply enduring them. Whether that lesson would be remembered or forgotten would depend on future military leaders who faced similar challenges in different wars under different circumstances. Foster prepared to command a new battalion while reflecting on the 6 months that had transformed a mechanical failure into a military revolution. His soldiers had proven that American ingenuity could overcome any logistical obstacle when proper motivation and authority were combined with practical experience and regulatory knowledge. The network's success had established precedents for military innovation that would influence how future commanders approach supply problems in combat operations. But those precedents would only matter if military institutions were willing to embrace change rather than suppress it to maintain traditional command structures. The success of the Allied Resource Recovery Network spread far beyond North Africa through channels that official military communications never could have reached. Soldiers wrote letters home, describing ice-cold Coca-Colas and American cigarettes appearing in impossible places. Families shared stories at dinner tables across Iowa and Alabama and Oregon about their boys overseas who had found ways to taste home again. Word travelled from base to base, unit to unit, theatre to theatre, carried by personnel transfers, medical evacuations, and the informal networks that connected American forces worldwide. By January 1944, requests for resource recovery programs were reaching Theatre Supply Command from Italy, Britain, and the Pacific. Commanders who had never heard of Forward Operating Base Charlie were asking how to establish similar operations in their areas of responsibility. The broken vending machine in Tunisia had inspired imitation across 3 continents and dozens of military installations. Major General Robert Crawford, commanding officer of Mediterranean Theatre Supply Operations, found himself briefing the Pentagon on logistics innovations that had emerged from enlisted personnel rather than staff colleges. Crawford was 52 years old, a career logistics officer who had managed supply operations in 2 previous conflicts. He had never encountered anything comparable to the network that had grown from McKenzie's unauthorized vending machine repair. The Pentagon briefing took place in February 1944, before an audience that included the Army Chief of Staff, the Quartermaster General, and representatives from the War Production Board. Crawford presented statistics that demonstrated the network's impact on military effectiveness throughout the Mediterranean theatre. Supply shortages had decreased by 34% in units served by resource recovery operations. Troop morale indicators had improved across all measurements. Combat readiness ratings had increased in 47 battalions simultaneously. But the statistics didn't capture the human impact of what McKenzie and his team had accomplished. Crawford described soldiers who had received their first mail from home in months because the network had established courier services between isolated units. He explained how resource recovery operations had provided winter clothing to troops in Italian mountains where official supplies had been delayed by transportation difficulties. He detailed instances where network personnel had delivered medical supplies to aid stations that had exhausted their official allocations. The network had evolved beyond supply distribution into comprehensive support services that addressed gaps in official military systems. They operated mail services, transportation networks, equipment repair facilities, and even entertainment programs using resources recovered from damaged or abandoned sources. Their activities touched every aspect of military life for soldiers serving in combat zones. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, listened to Crawford's presentation with the attention of a military leader who understood that wars were won by logistics as much as tactics. Marshall had observed that successful armies adapted to changing conditions, while unsuccessful armies adhered rigidly to established procedures. The Resource Recovery Network represented adaptation at its most fundamental level. Marshall asked the question that defined the Pentagon's response to the network's success. Could these methods be systematized and replicated throughout the Army without compromising military discipline and command authority? Crawford's answer would determine whether McKenzie's innovation became official military doctrine or remained an isolated experiment in the Mediterranean theatre. Crawford recommended the establishment of resource recovery specialist positions at division level throughout all theatres. Personnel selected for these positions would receive training in logistics, accounting, inter-unit cooperation, and regulatory compliance. They would operate under official authorization while maintaining the flexibility and responsiveness that had made the original network successful. The recommendation faced immediate opposition from conservative elements within the military establishment. Critics argued that authorizing enlisted personnel to operate independent supply networks would undermine command authority and create opportunities for corruption. They pointed to historical examples of military entrepreneurship that had evolved into black market profiteering and disciplinary problems. But supporters of the program argued that combat conditions required flexibility that peacetime regulations couldn't address. They noted that the original network had operated for 8 months without a single documented case of personal profiteering or regulatory violation. The success had been achieved through transparency, documentation, and accountability, rather than secrecy and unauthorized activity. The debate continued through March and April 1944, while resource recovery operations expanded throughout the Mediterranean theatre. Mackenzie's assignment to Theatre Supply Command had provided him with official authority to establish similar networks in other geographic areas. By spring, resource recovery specialists were operating in Italy, France, and the Pacific Islands, using methods developed at Forward Operating Base Charlie. The expansion revealed both the potential and the limitations of the resource recovery concept. Success required personnel with exceptional competence in multiple skill areas. Not every unit contained soldiers with Mackenzie's combination of mechanical knowledge, entrepreneurial initiative, and regulatory understanding. Attempts to replicate the network without appropriate personnel often resulted in failure or regulatory violations. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, who had conducted the original investigation, was assigned to develop training programs for resource recovery specialists. His curriculum included technical subjects like refrigeration repair and transportation management, alongside administrative topics like military accounting and inter-unit cooperation procedures. The training was comprehensive, practical, and designed to produce specialists who could operate effectively within military regulations. The first Resource Recovery Specialist School opened at Fort Lee, Virginia, in June 1944. The initial class included 30 soldiers selected from units throughout the Army, based on demonstrated competence in logistics, engineering, or administrative activities. Mackenzie served as chief instructor, teaching methods developed through 8 months of practical experience in North Africa. Santos designed the mechanical training curriculum based on equipment modifications he had developed for desert operations. His refrigeration course taught students to maintain cooling systems using improvised parts and non-standard power sources. His transportation module covered vehicle modification techniques that could extend operational range and payload capacity beyond manufacturer specifications. Martinez developed the currency and trading curriculum that taught students to operate in international environments where official American currency wasn't available. His course covered exchange rate calculations, foreign currency recognition, and negotiation techniques for dealing with local merchants and allied personnel from other nations. Thompson created the accounting and documentation curriculum that ensured all resource recovery activities could withstand official audit and regulatory review. His course emphasized transparency, accuracy, and compliance with military financial procedures, even when operating in unconventional circumstances. Morrison contributed intelligence and security training that taught students to identify and exploit supply opportunities while maintaining operational security and avoiding unauthorized intelligence activities. His curriculum covered reconnaissance techniques, source evaluation, and coordination with military intelligence personnel. Davis designed the transportation and distribution curriculum that taught students to establish and maintain supply networks across extended geographic areas. His course covered route planning, vehicle maintenance, and coordination with official transportation assets to maximize efficiency while minimizing conflicts with regular military operations. The training program produced its first graduates in August 1944, just as Allied forces were advancing through France and preparing for the final assault on Germany. Resource recovery specialists were assigned to combat units that would face supply challenges during rapid advances through territory where infrastructure had been destroyed by years of warfare. The specialists proved their value immediately during the breakout from Normandy and the subsequent pursuit of German forces across France. Official supply chains struggled to keep pace with rapidly advancing combat units, but resource recovery specialists maintained continuous supply flow by exploiting abandoned German supplies, coordinating with French resistance organizations, and establishing temporary distribution centers in captured territory. Private First Class James Kelly, a graduate of the first specialist class, established a resource recovery operation in liberated Paris that served 12 battalions during the city's reconstruction phase. Kelly's network provided fresh food, medical supplies, and communication services that weren't available through official channels while Paris infrastructure was being restored. His operation demonstrated that resource recovery methods could function in urban environments as effectively as they had in combat zones. The broken Coca-Cola machine at Forward Operating Base. Charlie never dispensed another bottle after that October morning in 1943. But it had already served its most important purpose. It had proven that American soldiers could solve any problem when necessity met ingenuity, when regulations became suggestions, and when survival demanded innovation over protocol. Mackenzie's 5-cent solution had fed thousands, connected allies across continents, and demonstrated that sometimes the most important military victories happen in mess tents rather than battlefields. That machine taught the army something it had never learned in any manual. The best logistics come from the bottom up, not the top down.